My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 28 years old and I work as a software developer in Hong Kong. Since moving here from Canada 3 years ago, I've fallen in love with hiking. The trails here are incredible, and Lantau Island has some of the best. I'd go up there almost every weekend, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. That all changed after what happened last November. It was a Saturday morning, around 7 a.m., and I decided to tackle the Lantau Peak Trail. The forecast called for clear skies, but when I got off the bus at Pa Kung Au, the whole area was blanketed in thick fog. I almost turned back, but I'd made the hour-long journey from my apartment in Kowloon, so I figured I'd at least start the hike and see if the fog cleared up as I gained elevation. The trail was completely empty. During peak season, you'd see dozens of hikers, but the fog must have kept everyone away. I didn't mind the solitude. I put in my earbuds and started the climb. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me. Everything was quiet, except for my breathing and footsteps on the stone steps I'd been hiking for about 45 minutes when I first saw him. Through the fog, I could make out a figure standing on the trail ahead of me. Just standing there, completely still, facing my direction. I assumed it was another hiker taking a break, so I kept walking. As I got closer, maybe 20 feet away, I called out, "Good morning," in Cantonese. The figure didn't respond. Didn't move at all. When I was about 10 feet away, I could finally make out more details. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, not hiking gear. He had on a dark jacket that looked like it was from the 1950s or 60s, and his face was pale, almost gray. His eyes were looking right at me, but there was something wrong about them. They seemed too wide, too unblinking. I stopped walking and pulled out one earbud. "Are you okay?" I asked, this time in English. He didn't answer, just kept staring with those wide eyes. I felt my heart starting to race. Something about this guy was seriously off. I decided to just walk past him and continue up the trail. As I moved to go around him, keeping as much distance as possible on the narrow path, he turned his head to follow my movement, but his body stayed perfectly still. Just his head, rotating slowly to track me. I picked up my pace once I was past him, practically jogging up the steep steps. When I glanced back, the fog had swallowed him up. I couldn't see anything behind me. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and kept climbing. The fog started to thin out as I got higher, and by the time I reached the peak, I could actually see the view. There were a few other hikers up there taking photos. I felt better being around other people. I spent about 20 minutes at the top, catching my breath and trying to forget about the weird guy. When I started my descent, the fog had gotten even thicker. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The trail was slippery from moisture, so I had to move slowly, carefully placing each step. That's when I heard it, footsteps behind me. Not the normal sound of some hiking. These were slow, deliberate, like someone was walking at the exact same pace as me. I stopped to let whoever it was pass. The footsteps stopped too. I started walking again. The footsteps resumed, matching my rhythm perfectly. "Hello?" I called out, turning around. Nothing but fog. No response. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold mountain air. I started walking faster, almost running down the trail. The footsteps behind me sped up too, staying at that same distance. Never getting closer, never falling behind. I was breathing hard now, more from panic than exertion. My phone had no signal. I thought about screaming for help, but I knew there was no one close enough to hear me in this fog. I just kept moving, trying to put distance between me and whatever was following me. Then I saw him again. The same man, standing in the middle of the trail, about 15 feet ahead. Same position as before, perfectly still, eyes fixed on me. But this time, I noticed something else. His feet weren't quite touching the ground. He was hovering, maybe an inch above the trail. I froze in place, feeling my stomach drop. He started moving toward me. Not walking, gliding. His feet still not touching the ground, his body rigid, only his legs moving in a walking motion that didn't match his forward momentum. I backed up, stumbled on a rock, and fell hard onto the trail. I scrambled backwards on my hands, trying to put distance between us. He stopped gliding forward and just stood there, maybe 6 feet away now. Up close, I could see his skin wasn't just pale. It was wrong. It had a waxy, translucent quality, like I could almost see through it to something beneath. His mouth slowly opened, and he made a sound that I'll never forget. It wasn't a voice. It was like wind through a tunnel, hollow and cold, forming words I couldn't understand. I don't know how I got up and ran. Pure adrenaline, I guess. I tore down that mountain trail like my life depended on it, not caring about the wet stones or the fog or anything except getting away. The footsteps followed, keeping pace. Every time I looked back, I saw his shape in the fog, always the same distance behind me. Gliding along the trail, I must have made it halfway down the mountain when I burst through the fog layer. The lower elevation had clearer air, and suddenly I could see the trail ahead of me properly. I kept running until I reached a section with other hikers. A group of local elderly hikers were doing their morning walk. I stopped, gasping for breath, and looked back up the trail. Nothing. No figure, no footsteps, just fog at the higher elevation. One of the elderly hikers, a woman in her 70s, noticed my distress and came over to ask if I was okay. I tried to explain what happened, but even as I was saying it, I realized how crazy it sounded. She listened patiently. Then her expression changed. She looked at the other hikers in her group, and they exchanged concerned glances. She told me, in broken English, that I wasn't the first person to report seeing the fog walker on Lantau Peak. According to local legend, he was a British surveyor who disappeared in the mountains during the 1960s, lost in an unusual fog that lasted 3 days. Search parties never found his body. Ever since then, people have reported seeing a figure in old-fashioned clothes walking the trails during heavy fog, always at the higher elevations. Most people who see him just feel watched and uneasy, but some, like me, experience him following them. The woman said I was lucky to have made it down safely. She'd heard of a few hikers over the years who encountered him and became disoriented, wandering off trail. Some were found eventually. Some weren't. I thanked her and got out of there as fast as I could. Took the first bus back to the city and spent the rest of the day in my apartment, doors locked, telling myself it had to have been my imagination or the fog playing tricks on my eyes. But I know what I saw. Those eyes, that impossible gliding movement. The sound of that voice. I still hike in Hong Kong, but I never go to Lantau Island anymore. And I absolutely never hike in fog. A few months ago, I was at a hiking gear shop in Mongkok and struck up a conversation with another customer about trails. When I mentioned I avoided Lantau, he gave me this knowing look and asked if I'd seen him too. I didn't have to ask who he meant. We both knew there's something up on that mountain, something that walks the trails when the fog rolls in, looking for people who venture too far into the mist. I don't know if it's a ghost or something else entirely, but I know I never want to see those dead, staring eyes again. Sometimes, on foggy mornings when I look out my apartment window toward Lantau Island, I swear I can see a figure standing on the distant peaks, just standing there, watching, waiting for the next hiker foolish enough to climb into the fog.
My name is David Wong. I'm 24 years old, and I moved to Hong Kong from Singapore 2 years ago for work. I'm an accountant at a firm in Central, and like most young professionals in this city, I was struggling to find affordable housing. Hong Kong's rent prices are absolutely insane. After months of living in a cramped, subdivided flat with 2 roommates in Mongkok, I finally found what seemed like an amazing deal. It was a studio flat in Sham Shui Po, one of the older districts in Kowloon. The building was from the 1970s, run down but still standing. The flat was on the 7th floor, and the rent was almost half of what I'd been paying. When the landlord, an elderly woman named Mrs. Leung, showed me the place, I couldn't believe my luck. It was small, maybe 200 square feet, but it was all mine.
She seemed eager to rent it out quickly and didn't ask many questions. There was something odd about the viewing, though. It was July, the middle of summer, and Hong Kong was experiencing a brutal heat wave. The temperature outside was pushing 35 degrees Celsius, but inside the flat, it was cold. Not just cool from air conditioning. Actually cold, like walking into a refrigerator. Mrs. Leung noticed me shivering and laughed nervously, saying the previous tenant must have left the AC running. But I didn't see any AC unit running. In fact, I didn't see an AC unit at all. I should have asked more questions. But I was desperate, and the price was too good to pass up. I signed the lease that same day and moved in a week later. The first night was fine. I was exhausted from moving boxes up 7 flights of stairs since the building's elevator was broken. I passed out around 10 p.m. and slept like a rock. But I woke up around 3 a.m. absolutely freezing. I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, which was my normal summer sleepwear, but I felt like I was in a walk-in freezer. I could see my breath in the air. In July. In Hong Kong, I got up to check if I'd somehow turned on an AC unit I hadn't noticed. There was nothing. No AC, no fan, nothing that could explain the temperature. I put on a hoodie and sweatpants and climbed back into bed, piling on every blanket I owned. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, the flat was normal temperature again. Warm, even a bit stuffy like you'd expect from an old building in summer. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, or maybe I was getting sick. I went to work and tried not to think about it, but that night, the same thing happened. Around 3 a.m., I woke up freezing. This time, I checked the temperature on my phone. It said 8 degrees Celsius inside my flat. That's impossible in Hong Kong summer without industrial cooling equipment. I put on even more layers and tried to sleep, but the cold seemed to seep into my bones no matter how many clothes I wore. This pattern continued every single night. Between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., the temperature in the flat would drop dramatically. Then, as soon as the sun started coming up, it would gradually return to normal. I bought a space heater, but it barely made a difference. The cold was too intense, too unnatural. After a week of barely sleeping, I started asking my neighbors about it. The flat next to mine was occupied by an elderly couple, the Chans. When I mentioned the cold, Mr. Chan's face went pale. He exchanged a look with his wife, and they both just shook their heads and went back inside their flat without saying a word. The flat across the hall was empty. Had been for years, according to the building's security guard, Uncle Lam. When I asked him about the cold in my flat, he stopped mopping the hallway and looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. He asked me how long I'd been living there. When I said 2 weeks, he just muttered something in Cantonese and walked away. But I caught one word I understood. Gui. Ghost. I tried to laugh it off. I'm not a superstitious person. I believe in science, in rational explanations. But I couldn't explain what was happening in my flat. Things got worse in the 3rd week. I started noticing other things beyond just the cold. Objects in my flat would be in different positions when I woke up. My shoes, which I always left by the door, would be in the middle of the room. My bathroom door, which I always left open, would be closed. Books I'd left on my desk would be on the floor. Then one night, I woke up at 3 a.m. as usual, shivering from the cold. But this time, I heard something. A sound like ice cracking. I sat up in bed and looked around the dark flat. The sound was coming from the bathroom. I grabbed my phone and turned on its flashlight. The beam of light shook as my hand trembled, partly from fear, partly from the cold. I walked slowly toward the bathroom, the cracking sound getting louder with each step. When I pushed open the door, I almost dropped my phone. The bathroom was covered frost. The mirror, the sink, the toilet, the tiles on the wall, everything had a thick layer of ice forming on it. Water was still running from the tap, but it was freezing solid as it flowed, creating icicles that reached down to the drain. The cracking sound was the ice expanding, spreading across every surface. I backed out of the bathroom and grabbed my jacket. I needed to get out of there. But as I turned toward the front door, I saw her. She was standing in the corner of the room, between my bed and the window. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a thin summer dress. Her skin was pale, almost blue, and her lips were darker, tinged with purple. Her hair was wet, plastered to her face and shoulders, and water dripped from it onto the floor, immediately freezing into small puddles of ice. She was staring at me with eyes that looked glassy, unfocused, and she was shivering, violently shivering, her whole body trembling like she was in the final stages of hypothermia. Her jaw was chattering, and frost was forming on her eyelashes, and in her hair. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. We just stood there, staring at each other in my freezing flat. Then she opened her mouth, and a sound came out that I'll never forget. It was like wind whistling through ice caves, and beneath it, barely audible, a voice saying the same words over and over in Cantonese. So cold, so cold, so cold. I don't remember running out of my flat. I don't remember taking the stairs down 7 flights. The next thing I knew, I was standing on the street outside the building, gasping for breath, my phone in my hand showing it was 3:47 a.m. I spent the rest of the night at a 24-hour McDonald's, wrapped in my jacket, trying to process what I'd seen. When the sun came up, I went back to the building and found Uncle Lam starting his morning shift. I grabbed his arm and demanded he tell me what happened in that flat. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then finally told me the story. 5 years ago, a young woman lived in my flat. She was a factory worker, alone in Hong Kong, sending money back to her family in mainland China. During a particularly hot summer, her AC unit broke. She couldn't afford to fix it, and her landlord refused to help. She kept working long hours in the heat, coming home to a stifling hot flat every night one day. She didn't show up for work. After 3 days, the factory called the police. They found her in the flat, dead from heat stroke. She'd been trying to cool down by taking cold showers, and that's where they found her, in the bathtub, fully clothed, the water still running. The landlord covered it up, never disclosed it to future tenants. Mrs. Leung inherited the building from him and continued the practice. Ever since then, the flat turns freezing cold at night, like she's still there, still desperately trying to cool down from that fatal heat, but now she's trapped in eternal cold instead. I moved out that same day. Broke my lease, lost my deposit, didn't care. I crashed on friends' couches until I found a new place. Mrs. Leung tried to keep my deposit, but when I threatened to report the undisclosed death and the supernatural activity, she gave it back without argument. I heard through Uncle Lam that Mrs. Leung managed to rent out the flat again a month later to another desperate tenant. I wonder if they're still there, waking up every night at 3 a.m. to unbearable cold, seeing that shivering figure in the corner, hearing her voice endlessly repeating, "So cold, I still live in Hong Kong, but I'll never live in Sham Shui Po again." And whenever I apartment hunt, I always ask about the history of the place, no matter how crazy it makes me look. Some deals are too good to be true for a reason. Sometimes, on particularly hot summer nights, I wake up at 3 a.m. for no reason. And for just a moment, I swear I can feel that same bone-deep cold, and I hear that voice on the edge of my consciousness. So cold, so cold, so cold. My name is Alex Tam. I'm 26 years old, and I work as a communications technician for one of Hong Kong's radio broadcasting companies. My job involves maintaining the transmission equipment on various peaks around the territory, making sure the signal stays strong across the region. It's mostly routine work, climbing up mountains, checking equipment, replacing parts when needed. I've been doing it for 3 years now, and I've hiked up Tai Mo Shan, Hong Kong's tallest peak, at least 50 times. That all changed after what happened last March. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I got the call from my supervisor, Raymond. He said we were getting reports of signal interference from our Tai Mo Shan relay station. The automated monitoring system showed everything was working fine, But listeners in the new territories were complaining about strange sounds bleeding through the broadcast, static, weird frequencies, and what some people described as voices that shouldn't be there. Raymond asked me to head up there first thing Thursday morning to check it out in person. I didn't think much of it. Interference happens all the time, usually from illegal broadcasting equipment or atmospheric conditions. I packed my toolkit, grabbed my gear, and set my alarm for 5 a.m. The plan was to catch the first minibus up to the trailhead and be at the relay station by 8 a.m. The hike up was normal at first. It was early spring, cool and misty, with low clouds hanging over the peak. I passed a few other hikers on their way down from sunrise, watching, but by 7:30 a.m., I was alone on the trail. The relay station is about 100 meters off the main hiking path, accessible only by a service road that's gated and locked. I'm one of 5 people in the company who has a key. When I reached the station, everything looked fine from the outside. It's a small concrete building, maybe 4 meters by 6 meters, with a tall transmission tower next to it. The door was locked, no signs of tampering. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The equipment room was freezing cold, much colder than it should have been. We have climate control in there to keep the equipment at optimal temperature, but my breath was visible in the air. The first thing I did was check the thermostat. It read -2 degrees Celsius. That's impossible. The heating system was running at full capacity, but somehow the temperature had dropped below freezing. I started my diagnostic routine, checking each piece of equipment systematically. Everything appeared to be functioning normally. Signal strength was good, power levels were stable, no hardware faults. But then I noticed something odd on the spectrum analyzer. There was a signal coming through that shouldn't be there. A carrier wave on a frequency we don't use. Broadcasting at irregular intervals, I put on my headphones and tuned into that frequency. At first, all I heard was static. Then, cutting through the noise, I heard it. A voice. Distorted and broken up, but definitely human. It was speaking Cantonese, but the words were fragmented, like someone's transmission was being interrupted. I could only make out pieces. Can't find the way down. So cold. The fog won't clear. I checked our broadcast logs. We weren't transmitting anything on that frequency. Nobody was. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere close, bleeding into our equipment. I tried to triangulate the source using our directional antenna, and that's when things got really strange. The signal was coming from higher up the mountain, above the relay station. But there's nothing up there except the peak itself and the weather radar station, which operates on completely different frequencies. I grabbed my handheld radio to call Raymond and let him know what I'd found. The radio was dead, not out of battery, just completely silent. No static, no carrier tone, nothing. I tried my mobile phone. No signal, which was weird because I always had at least 2 bars up here. I walked outside the building, holding my phone up, trying to catch a signal. Nothing. That's when I realized how quiet it was, unnaturally quiet. I couldn't hear any birds, no wind, no distant sounds of traffic from the valleys below. Just absolute silence, except for a faint humming coming from the transmission tower. I looked up at the tower, and I noticed something I'd never seen before. There was ice forming on the metal framework, spreading slowly upward from the base. Even though the temperature outside was around 10 degrees Celsius, I went back inside the building to pack up my equipment and get out of there. Something was very wrong, and I wasn't interested in finding out what. But as I was unplugging my laptop, the radio equipment suddenly came to life on its own. All the speakers in the room started broadcasting that same broken transmission, but now it was clearer, louder. Lost in the fog. Been walking for hours. Can't find the trail markers. Please, if anyone can hear this, I'm somewhere near the peak. I don't know what's happening. The fog is so thick. Wait, there's someone? I can see someone in the fog. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold. Screaming. Terrified. Desperate screaming that cut off abruptly, replaced by dead silence. Then the transmission continued, but the voice was different now. Calmer. Wrong. Found the trail. Coming down now. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. The voice repeated that phrase over and over, but it didn't sound human anymore. The inflection was off, mechanical, like someone poorly imitating human speech. And underneath it, I could hear something else. Breathing. Heavy, rasping breathing that didn't match the rhythm of the words. I ripped the power cables out of the equipment, but the transmission kept playing. The speakers were still broadcasting even with no power, the voice still repeating, "Everything is fine," in that horrible flat tone. I grabbed my bag and ran for the door. Outside, the fog had rolled in thick. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The trail should have been right there, just past the service gate, but I couldn't see it through the fog. I pulled out my phone to use the compass app, but the screen was glitching, showing impossible coordinates, jumping between locations hundreds of kilometers apart. I heard footsteps in the fog, slow, heavy footsteps on the trail, getting closer. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. Then, from somewhere in the white fog, I heard that same voice from the transmission, "Everything is fine." I started running blindly through the fog, hoping to hit the main trail. I tripped over rocks, pushed through bushes, completely disoriented. The footsteps followed, always maintaining the same distance, never getting closer, but never falling behind. And that voice kept echoing through the fog, surrounding me. "Everything is fine. Everything is fine." I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Suddenly, I broke through the fog layer and found myself on the main hiking trail, about halfway down the mountain. There were other hikers there, a group of elderly people doing their morning exercise. I must have looked insane, gasping for breath, wild-eyed and terrified. One of them asked if I was okay. I tried to explain about the transmission and the fog and the voice, but even as I was saying it, I knew how crazy it sounded. They gave me water and helped me down to the road where I caught a taxi back to the city. When I got to the office, Raymond was confused. He said all our monitoring equipment showed the relay station was functioning perfectly. No interference, no problems at all. I showed him the recordings I'd made on my laptop, but the files were corrupted. Just static. I refused to go back to Tai Mo Shan. Raymond assigned another technician, Danny, to handle that station. Danny went up there the following week for routine maintenance. When he came back, he said everything was normal. Temperature was fine, equipment working perfectly, no strange transmissions. But 2 weeks after that, Danny didn't come to work. He wasn't answering his phone. His roommate reported him missing. The police found his car in the Tai Mo Shan parking area. His hiking gear was still in the trunk. They searched the mountain for 3 days, but never found him. The last post on his Instagram was from the peak. Just a photo of fog and a caption that said, "Everything is fine. I quit my job after that. I couldn't risk being sent back up there." I work at a computer repair shop now, nowhere near any mountains. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm trying to sleep, I hear it. That voice, faint and distant, like it's being transmitted from far away. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. I'll never set foot on Tai Mo Shan again. And if you're planning to hike up there, especially on foggy days, maybe reconsider. Because if you hear a voice in the fog telling you everything is fine, don't believe it. Run. My name is Jennifer Lee. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a freelance photographer based in Hong Kong. I specialize in urban exploration photography, documenting abandoned buildings and forgotten places around the territory. Hong Kong has a surprising number of these locations if you know where to look. Old factories, deserted apartment blocks, and especially the abandoned villages scattered throughout the new territories. There are over 700 abandoned villages in Hong Kong. Most people don't know this. After the economic boom in the 1970s and 80s, rural populations flooded into the city for work, leaving entire villages empty. Nature slowly reclaimed them, turning them into haunting ruins, surrounded by overgrown jungle. I'd photographed about a dozen of these villages over the past 2 years for a photography book I was working on. Each one had its own eerie atmosphere, but they were ultimately just empty buildings and crumbling walls. Nothing supernatural, nothing scary beyond the normal creepiness of abandoned places. That changed when I visited Yim Tin Tsai village. Last October, Yim Tin Tsai is on a small island off Sai Kung. The village was abandoned in the 1990s after the salt pans that sustained it for centuries became unprofitable. A few buildings had been restored for tourists in recent years, but most of the village remained empty and decaying. I'd been planning to photograph it for months, waiting for the right weather and light conditions. I chose a weekday in late October, figuring there would be fewer tourists. I took the ferry from Sai Kung Pier around 3 p.m., planning to shoot during golden hour and catch the last ferry back at 7 p.m. The boat was nearly empty, just me and an elderly couple who got off at a different island. When I arrived at Yim Tin Tsai, the small pier was deserted. There's a restored chapel and museum near the entrance that sometimes has volunteers, but today everything was closed. Perfect. I preferred working alone anyway, without tourists wandering into my shots. I spent the first hour photographing the restored areas and the old salt pans. The light was beautiful, golden and warm, casting long shadows across the ruins. Then I ventured deeper into the village, where the abandoned houses were slowly being consumed by vegetation. Trees grew through roofs, vines covered walls, and grass pushed up through cracked concrete floors. I was setting up a shot of a particularly photogenic ruined house when I noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints in the dirt leading to one of the buildings. Recent footprints, still clearly defined, not washed out by rain. That wasn't particularly alarming. Other photographers visited these places, or sometimes villagers' descendants came back to check on family property. But what made me pause was that the footprints only went into the building. There were no footprints coming back out. I called out in Cantonese, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response. I switched to English and tried again. Nothing. I told myself whoever made those footprints must have left by a different exit. Even though I couldn't see any other clear path through the overgrown vegetation, I continued working, moving from building to building, capturing the decay and the way nature was reclaiming the village. The sun was getting lower now, maybe an hour before I needed to head back to the pier. That's when I noticed the lights. In one of the houses about 50 meters away, deeper in the abandoned section of the village, I saw a warm, flickering light in the windows, like candlelight or an oil lamp. My first thought was that maybe a caretaker or security guard was there. But as I watched, the light moved from one window to another inside the house, as if someone was walking through the rooms carrying a lamp. I decided to investigate. Maybe it was another photographer, and we could share information about the location. I walked toward the house, my camera still hanging around my neck. As I got closer, I could see the building was in terrible condition. The roof had mostly collapsed and the walls were crumbling, but the light was still there, moving inside, clearly visible through the empty window frames. "Hello?" I called out as I approached. The light stopped moving. "I'm a photographer, just wondering if you're also here shooting the village?" No response. The light remained stationary now, coming from what looked like the back room of the house. I reached the entrance, a doorway with no door, just an opening leading into darkness. I pulled out my phone and turned on its flashlight, shining it inside. The interior was a wreck. Debris everywhere, collapsed ceiling beams, walls covered in mold and vegetation, and no sign of any light source. No candles, no lamps, nothing. But I could still see that warm glow coming from the back room, spilling out through the doorway. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave. But curiosity got the better of me. I'm a photographer. I explore abandoned places. This is what I do. I stepped carefully into the building, testing each floorboard before putting my full weight on it. The light in the back room continued to flicker, casting dancing shadows on the ruined walls. I reached the doorway to the back room and shined my flashlight inside. The room was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no debris, nothing. But the light was still there, coming from the corner of the room. And as I watched, frozen in the doorway, I realized the light wasn't reflecting off anything. It was just there, hovering in the air, about chest height, flickering like a flame but with no visible source. Then it moved. The light floated slowly toward me, and as it got closer, I could make out something in its center. A face. A woman's face, barely visible in the glow, her features distorted and wavering like I was seeing her through water. Her eyes were wide open, staring at me, and her mouth was moving like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The light followed, floating through the doorway into the main room. I stumbled over debris as I retreated, nearly dropping my camera. The light kept coming, slowly, steadily, and now I could hear something. A faint whisper, so quiet I couldn't make out the words, but the sound of it made my skin crawl. I turned and ran. I didn't care about my equipment, didn't care about my photos. I just needed to get out of that building. As I burst through the doorway back into the fading daylight, I looked back. The light was in the doorway now, watching me. And behind it, in the darkness of the ruined house, I saw more lights. 3, 4, maybe 5 of them, all starting to move toward the entrance. I ran through the village, past the abandoned houses, my feet pounding on the overgrown paths. The sun was setting fast now, and shadows were growing longer. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I just ran toward the pier, praying the ferry hadn't left early. When I reached the restored area near the entrance, I finally stopped to catch my breath. I turned around, expecting to see those lights following me. But the village behind me was dark and still. No lights, no movement, nothing but empty ruins. In the gathering dusk, I checked my watch. It was 6:45 p.m. The ferry would arrive in 15 minutes. I sat on a bench near the pier, trying to calm down, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was some kind of bioluminescence or reflected light playing tricks, but I knew what I'd seen. That face in the light. Those eyes. When the ferry finally arrived, I was the only passenger boarding. As the boat pulled away from the island, I looked back at the village. And there, in the windows of the abandoned houses, I saw them. Dozens of lights, flickering in the darkness, all along the ruined buildings. The captain noticed me staring and said something in Cantonese. My Cantonese isn't great, but I understood enough. He said the villagers call them the watching lights. He said they appear after sunset in the empty houses, like the spirits of the people who used to live there are still keeping their lamps lit, still waiting for family members who moved away and never came back. He told me the last ferry always leaves before dark because the crew refuses to stay after the lights appear. Then he looked at me seriously and asked if I'd seen them up close. When I nodded, he just shook his head and turned back to piloting the boat. I haven't been back to Yimtinsai. I haven't been back to any abandoned village since that day. When I got home, I checked the photos I'd taken before the encounter. They were fine, perfectly normal shots of ruins and vegetation. But the last photo, the one I'd taken right before I noticed the first light, showed something I hadn't seen through my viewfinder. In the window of that ruined house, barely visible, there's a figure. A woman in old-fashioned clothes, standing in the darkness, staring directly at the camera. And in front of her, just starting to appear, is a small point of light. I've deleted my entire portfolio of abandoned village photographs. I'm done with urban exploration. These days, I photograph weddings and corporate events. Normal stuff with living people in well-lit spaces. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm trying to sleep, I see them behind my closed eyelids. Those lights floating in the darkness with their watching faces. And I wonder how many other abandoned villages in Hong Kong have lights that appear after dark, How many empty houses are still occupied by something that never left? If you ever visit one of Hong Kong's abandoned villages, make sure you leave before sunset. And if you see lights in the windows, lights that shouldn't be there, don't investigate. Just leave. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and some residents never truly leave.